Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Chitra Rajeshwari, and I'm the principal for the Global Development Practice at Avasant and also the Executive Director with Avasant Foundation. We're very thrilled and excited to have you all at our first ESG Digital Forum. We have an amazing panel lined up and a wonderful discussion. I know each of you will walk away from this 1 hour with much more than you have much more than what you have right now. So building an ESG blueprint and economic imperative for balancing growth and sustainable goals is our topic today. And ESG is an important part of Avasant's offering. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Mr. Randy Spires, who is a distinguished Avasant Fellow and expert of circular economy and ESG. Randy, please take it away for this phenomenal discussion that we're going to have today. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much, Chitra. Now, first of all, I want to appreciate everybody's participation in this panelist today. We're still hopefully waiting on one panelist to join us. Hopefully he'll be able to join us, but we have a distinguished group amongst us to discuss about ESG being fairly new to the industry. As you can see, if you pull up Bloomberg or Washington Post today, it's part of the front pages of ESG. We're going to be discussing in regards to ESG, the balancing growth with sustainability, as well as social and governance aspects across the companies and how they can complement each other and not have ESG perceived as an overhead or an overhead burden. I expect this discussion for the next hour or so to be very robust because we're trying to look at it from a private as well as public sector, as well as across the industry. So if we can move along with the presentation. We can go on to the next. My background basically comes from systems engineering and design. Got involved with environmental issues and constraints back in the 1990s, designing solutions for the post-Cold War WMD programs, where I authored a couple of white papers around ecosystem-based management sustainability and the importance of the biodiversity. Those later became a national pilot I did under the Clinton administration with the Chippewa nations as well as other Aboriginal communities. And then basically, as we know, things have changed, things evolve, and we kind of fell to the backfire for most everybody. But now it's recently become of importance again. So as we come into this, ESG now is a driving force, becoming a driving force to support the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. And so we're going to move on to talk to our panel, and we're going to engage in some discussions, and we're going to be talking about some of why ESG is becoming more critical. So if I can get some opening remarks from the panelists, like Anupam, why has ESG risen to the top priorities for many organizations?
Thank you, Randy, and welcome all. So as you mentioned in your opening statement, Randy, ESG is now on the front page, not just of every publication, but also in the boardroom and on the radar of all the companies, private sector and public sector. And the reason for that is, although ESG has been around for decades in different shapes and form, whether it's sustainability, whether it's diversity, inclusion, whether it's risk and governance, these were different initiatives within a corporation that operated in silos and often not talking to each other. And companies had no way of assessing how well they were really doing in these areas. So they, were around, and companies were executing on different parameters, but they couldn't really talk about it in the market in terms of the impact. So ESG in the recent years has become a more holistic approach to track and measure the carbon footprint and the socio-economic impact of a company's operations in their community and in their region. And it has become more than just an initiative that drives goodwill and CSR. It has actually become a competitive differentiator. And that's because today it affects your company's branding, your customers' perception. It drives a lot of efficiencies within your supply chain and other business operations. And essentially, it's allowing your company to become one that drives the triple bottom line, which is people, profits, and planet. Now, the other major reason why ESG today is become very prominent is compliance and reporting. And there's major regulations in the offing. They're coming out next year from SEC, and IFRS that are going to compel corporations to report on their ESG adherence and policies. And that to me is actually an even bigger reason why the board level executives are involved, and why this is an imperative, an economic imperative for companies today.
That's a good point, Anupam. And as we go around and get for opening remarks from different panelists, that's a good lead in to Sarah and IBM. How are they addressing IBM's client needs, right? From regards to ESG, especially when we got right now various standards out there. Sarah?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Randy. And I think I'll echo Anupam's opening remarks in saying that indeed we are seeing ESG and sustainability in general becoming a core differentiator for companies going forward, and they don't see it as a burden. They see it as a way to really differentiate in the market. How are we helping our clients? I think we are doing very many different things. We could have a whole different session on how we're helping our clients, but most clients that we work with have figured out their materiality. So they've done a materiality assessment to understand which ESG areas are pertinent to the work that they do, and do their stakeholders care most about. Most companies that we work with have defined that, and they're pursuing various initiatives within that. A lot of companies, as we know, have honed in on climate action and climate change, specifically emissions management. And most corporations that we know today are focused on a net zero goal, a net zero timeline. While we think that is amazing, that's great, that's really needed, especially with the climate issues that we're seeing recently, we always encourage our clients to think more broadly. So not to have a carbon tunnel vision, but to think more broadly about ESG, and especially around those issues, even outside within the E part in environmental, like biodiversity, circularity, as well as social issues and governance issues that affect their stakeholders, including customers, including communities where they work, including their own employees, shareholders, and all other stakeholders that are affected by the company. So the general answer to your question is there are very many ways to address ESG in very different companies. The key is making sure that you have a very well-defined materiality assessment on your ESG, and you know which areas matter most to your stakeholders.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. Absolutely. And that leads into also around how is government, right? How is the public sector? How are government agencies and so forth helping local communities as well as businesses enable ESG initiatives? And that's one of the reasons we have Meg, Representative Froelich, here as part of the panel.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you to be part of. Thank you, Avasant, for putting this together and to be part of these this distinguished panel. It is a great way to start our day over here in Colorado, or here in Colorado. I'll just briefly set the stage in the ways in which government can affect ESG policies. So an example would be in Colorado, we have a greenhouse gas emissions reduction roadmap created by the governor, and each agency under the governor is responsible for meeting targeted goals. In addition, we have a huge tranche of federal dollars that have already been allocated and have recently been voted upon with the Inflation Reduction Act that include hundreds of millions, literally, of dollars flowing into states. And so it is going to be incumbent upon the states in which we live to exercise, to allocate those dollars through legislation. The other piece is that all legislation needs to include specific language that makes sure that governance is appropriate and impacting communities that have been disproportionately impacted, or implementation with an equity lens. So I can give examples of that going forward, but those are opportunities that exist at the local government level, and even down to your city and town councils, where we're urging folks to implement sustainability plans, and many have, of course, but it gets into one of our panelists about just municipal issues like garbage and recycling, and what kind of commitment your local community is going to make. And even though it is down to the state level, and then even down to the local level, if you think of a state like California and what an economic impact California has globally, if they like Colorado, and California is already doing this, are leaders in ESG implementation policies, or implementing policies that affect that include ESG, then it really does have a pretty huge impact on the economy globally.
Thank you, Meg. And that's a great lead in, understanding the private industry, understanding the public sector, and especially with the Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed. How does the industry associations to help facilitate this? And that's why one of the reasons we have Daryl Smith on here. Daryl, can you help us understand that? Bringing both the private industry and public sector together.
Good morning, everybody, and I appreciate you inviting me today. And Representative, thank you for mentioning the recycling industry. We appreciate that always. So I'm the president and CEO of the National Waste and Recycling Association. We represent the private sector of waste collection and recycling in the country. You know, we represent companies like Waste Management and Republic, on down to, you know, smaller entities that have 2 or 3 trucks and you know, in Iowa or someplace. So you know, we're integrally involved in the collection of waste and the recycling of waste. And you know, we often call ourselves the original environmentalists. So we kind of come at ESG from 2 different angles. One, we have our own companies that we care about. We're trying to do things within our own organizations to reduce emissions from landfills, to, you know, increase recycling rates through better processes. But we're also here to help all the other entities in the world, from residential to commercial to industrial, improve their recycling capabilities. And we're here to serve as consultants in that regard quite often. Within our own companies, ESG is playing a bigger and bigger role, especially within our public companies that are looking at new requirements through SEC and the like. You know, and within our own companies, we're looking at, you know, things like bringing more women to our industry. It's very male dominated. We're looking at things like bringing veterans and minorities into our industry as part of our ESG initiatives. And then, of course, you know, there are all the environmental issues that we face that we care a great deal about, and governance also. So I think, you know, sometimes it gets kind of micro focused on environment, but, you know, ESG has grown throughout the years to really incorporate all the ways you can be a good person and be a good company in your work life and do good things. So, you know, I'm happy to talk more about recycling and waste collection as we go here. So.
Appreciate that, Daryl. Thank you very much. And as we start into the discussion, as always, we're going to also be asking the people who are here, right, observing, to ask questions as well. I'll have the chat open to be able to look, because I can see some good questions coming in. But as we move along, we're going to move into more of a panel discussion here, and we're going to talk about what are the key areas right now of focus, right, with setting and integrating ESG goals into an overall business or public sector strategy. So first, Daryl, the question to you, you know, what are organizations, at least from your industry perspective, looking at from leveraging recycling sustainable materials to achieve their ESG goals? Or are they looking at their waste streams, and or are they looking at waste streams and looking at potentially turning those to revenue streams through some form of innovation?
Well, there is a lot going on, right after COVID, which we, by the way, played a major role in. We could never shut down, and we didn't shut down, or we would have had a second public health crisis. There's been a lot of attention placed on recycling. And I think it all kind of started with the new emphasis on plastics and worried about ocean plastics and things like that. But we're just seeing a big uptick in society and companies and everybody caring about recycling and working towards a net zero type of society, or a zero waste society. I could talk a little bit about my thoughts on using the term zero, which I don't think, sometimes that your goals should be a little bit more, should remain realistic. But we can talk about that at another time. But we, relative to recycling, there are a couple big issues in the country that people should know about. One, we have a lot of recycled materials, so we're not, our goal is not necessarily to collect more recycled materials. It's to find markets for the recycled materials that we do collect. So, quite often we get left holding the bag, and a lot of the major brands and people that make packaging and things like this will come out with a big press release saying we've now, made our package recyclable. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything unless there is infrastructure to recycle it, unless there are end markets that want to buy it from us. We sell these things as a commodity and make money off of them. So unless there's some market we can sell into, it's really kind of meaningless. But there are a lot of things going on right now where the brand manufacturers, the waste industry, the recyclers are all coming together in some new coalitions within the last few years to try to work on this problem together, and try to, make sure that things are actually getting recycled, and that it's not just greenwash. So, those are some of the things, my industry, we don't make the waste, all we do is try to find a home for it. Sometimes that home is a landfill, and modern landfills today, you'll be surprised, are really, really impressive institutions that you can go visit and tour. But they've really come a long ways. We don't call them dumps anymore. We call them modern landfills. And a landfill is really a place to store waste until we find a better use for it. It's not as necessarily the place it's going to be forever. And we can talk more about that at some point. But that's kind of a quick brush on my industry, and I don't want to take up too much time. So.
No, that's a great question, and I think it's one of the things you mentioned there about recyclables. I think is a very good point that you're making. Yeah. That by itself doesn't mean it's recyclable, right? It's how can it be reused? And have you looked at other innovations, other technologies such as myosealing, right? To be able to do the decomposition and the makeup of new materials that can be reused.
Yeah.
And this is a question both for yourself as well as back to Representative Froelich. Is there incentives being set up at the state and local level to help bring this different type of innovations together for the betterment of the community, the environment, as well as create additional industry growth?
Thank you. And it's good. I should say the waste management folks are good partners for us in the work that we're trying to do. So there's a couple ways you can approach it. We are trying to incentivize end user markets to bring those folks to Colorado, but we don't have a high enough recycle rate because we're a very libertarian state. And so we allow everyone to choose what to do with their waste, and they have to pay extra to have their recycled materials picked up. So most people just put it in with the trash. So we're trying to increase our recycle rates and then foster end user markets. But of course, in a circular economy, they have to all work together. So we had a big bill fostering end user markets. And then we have this additional piece that just went into play last year, which is extended producer responsibility. So that is and greenwashing is a real challenge I see in the chat. Absolutely. So that's some of the things. And then as we get on to further discussions, we've done a lot of work on air quality and But just in general, our government work falls into two categories, the carrots and the sticks. And thank you to federal funds, we're able to do a lot more carrots. And thank you to a very pro-business libertarian governor, we are really disincentivized to put in too many sticks or too many penalties to business for not complying with our goals. So we'll see when we have less funds from the federal government if we increase our penalty approach. But at the moment, we're in a good space where we're able to incentivize. And later, if it's of interest, I can talk about what we did in terms of air quality, in terms of trying to hold businesses accountable, but also providing them with grants so that they can make their operations more beneficial to our air quality, but also not hurt their bottom line too much.
Yeah, and Representative Froelich, I think obviously, as you mentioned, Colorado is a very liberal or progressive state, but really ESG should not be a political issue. This should be an issue that every government, every state and country needs to now comply with and enforce, because it's a question of survival, not just of the planet, but of our business, of our economy. And that's the awareness that we should be bringing, so that it's not looked upon as a political issue.
Agreed. So in regards to, in the previous question I had with Darrell as well as with Representative Froelich, in regards to how the innovations, a material by itself, to recycle materials by itself, well, if there's not a market for it, but with the combination of innovation from the private industry, right, and the incentives that are in place to take advantage of that innovation, how's private business coming to address that? And from your perspective, Sarah or Anupam, what are you witnessing? What are you seeing in the market space?
Sure. So I I can start if that's okay with you, Anupam. What we're seeing is that there really need to be alliances, right? IBM, for example, is part of an alliance called the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. One of my colleagues famously said, the heroes will not save us. It will take all of us to deal with a lot of the sustainability issues that there are today. And in the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, it's a coalition of all types of organizations. So private companies, NGOs, government entities, all working towards this very serious question that Darrell pointed out to, right? Recyclability doesn't mean it is actually recycled. So how do you actually create that very circular economy? And it starts with data, which IBM provides, data on where we're recycling, what is recyclable, who can actually do the work that needs to be done. And so bringing all these entities together, we're finding is one of the big ways that is crucial in driving sustainability across the different organizations. And it's not just an issue for recycling, it's in fair living wage, it's in environmental issues like Scope 3 emissions, where you have to collaborate with your suppliers. Alliances are critical to businesses being effective in driving ESG goals. And that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're driving at IBM.
Thank you. Anupam, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so essentially, I always joke that the only way to get ESG to become more spoken about is either to create a Marvel comic character, an ESG Superman, or to soxify this whole industry. And if you look at it, fintech initially came up because of the regulations that came out in the industry, and that was needed. But now fintech is driving innovation and business growth across the whole financial services industry. And the same thing is happening with ESG tech. So right now, of course, companies are waking up because they know these regulations are coming and they have to provide the data and the reporting, and that's important. But what they really need is an ESG roadmap. Every company today needs to develop a strategy and a roadmap to get there over the next few years. And that starts from them figuring out how to collect the ESG data across the organization, how to report on it, and prepare a holistic dashboard. And then follow that with obviously a very comprehensive program across the enterprise, across supply chain, across their customer channels, across the internal business operations, across IT, to bring about ESG in every component of the organization. So this strategy or roadmap should embrace everything from green tech to enabling climate resilient transformation to driving ESG compliance across their entire business operations, including looking at their technology environment. And what many companies don't realize is IT and technology today is a major consumer and a polluter because of the fact that it takes a lot of power. So bringing this awareness and driving specific initiatives through a very structured roadmap across the organization is one of the key to not just complying with the ESG initiatives, but ensuring that your company is on the path to net zero. And then you can proudly claim to your customers, to the market and shareholders about how well the company is doing.
Thank you, Anupam. Now we're going to move into another area, but I think this leads up to a very good discussion in regards to public and private organizations setting and aligning their operational and development goals and objectives. And when we talk about ESG, right, one of the big goals here is sustainability, and sustainability has to have a definition around that, right? Because when you say that, everybody, we got 40 plus participants minimum in this conference may have a different definition. That is typically around the sustainability of the ecosystem, ecozones, and its biodiversity, basically the depth and breadth of that biodiversity. And that includes communities, right? Human beings as being a part of that. So when you're looking at setting these goals and bringing this integration together, right, from a private business perspective, you got not only when you're talking about impacts, its impact to the communities, its impact to the ecozones, and its impact to the workers, and all those aspects. How is that being taken into account from a private business perspective? Sarah, can you talk to that?
Yeah, it's a broad question, Randy. So I'm going to try and address it, I guess, depending on the way I understand it.
Sure.
I think the way we look at sustainability in general is really aligning to the 17 UN SDGs, and also aligning to the triple bottom line that Anupam talked about at the beginning: people, planet, profit. So we think that sustainable growth is people positive. It will conserve our planet, and it will also lead to not just profit, but also sustainable impact in the communities where we work and live. So how do we help companies address those goals? I'm going to sound like a broken record when I say it really depends on your materiality and your industry. Depending on what industry you work in, you have to figure out which goals are you going after. I was talking to a consumer packaged goods company, for example, this morning, where a lot of their focus right now is in transparent supply. So giving their customers traceability of products from a farm to shelf, enabling them to see provenance, and that makes sure that they help them see that the product has been sourced responsibly, that it meets all the quality requirements, that the carbon footprint is traceable. And this is big for consumers today. Consumers want to know that what they're buying is doing good, not hurting the planet. And so if you think of that CPG example, it's very different, for example, from an oil and gas company where our clients are mostly focused on how do you transition to renewables? How do you make sure that you're investing in things like EVs and charging stations? So it's a very broad topic. Where to start is to start with what is material to your industry, what is material to what you do, and what is important to your stakeholders.
That's both across the supply chain as well as up the value chain. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's all of operations, both internal and external, right? When we talk about sustainability, it goes back to the fact that we have to think outside the box and outside our walls, because ensuring sustainability within our own operations is not enough. What we buy from our suppliers has to be sustainable. How our customers use what we sell them has to be sustainable. And so it's a very holistic, circular way of thinking about sustainability, for sure,
Right.
across the value chain.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Representative Froelich, how is state agencies and local community governments, how are they working to bridge this gap, right, or help bridge the achievement of these ESG goals from a stakeholder perspective with the private industry, and are you leveraging industry associations such as the Waste Management and Recycling as a part of that?
Right, yes, so really there's synergy with what Sarah was saying in terms and with what other folks are saying, is that we really are thinking about this in terms of investments. So the state is making investments, the federal government is making investments, local governments are making investments, and if they do it in the absence of as Anupam was saying, in the absence of an ESG plan, in the absence of set goals, and then the follow-up, are you meeting the metrics that have been put in place? Then we're not going to make the progress that we need to make. So it's incumbent upon organizations to both have the plan and then make those investments. So I just put a quote from our one of our air quality bills that invested over $100 million in helping companies meet air quality, basically greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, but then has this compliance piece built in as well. So I think it's both having a plan, coming together to have a plan, and then really researching the effective ways to measure whether or not you're making progress or not before you make those investments, not after. And then, including specific language on the social components of the social goals, and in terms of, and so that goes with the stakeholding process. Not only do you want to include the corporations, but you want to include impacted communities. And that's one of the benefits to this, is that, as was mentioned, it really shouldn't be political. We're drilling down into community, however that's defined. Is the community your state? Is the community your nation? Is the community your neighborhood? And then including all folks at the table and agreeing that these solutions are necessary for the planet.
Thank you, Representative. Darryl, that puts the Waste Management Recycling Industry Association into a very critical role as bridging that partnership across the public and the private sectors, not just for the waste management and the recycling industry, but those who are their customers. Would you agree?
I agree completely, and I agree with the representative that this should not be political. I was going to, let you know, relative to our industry, we work hand in glove with the public sector, as representatives of the private sector. 50% of waste is collected by the private sector as far as residential goes, and about 50% is collected by municipalities. And 80 to something like 80% of commercial and industrial waste is collected by the private sector, and the rest by municipalities. Beyond that, municipalities own some of the sorting facilities. We own some of the sorting facilities. They own some of the landfills. We own some of the landfills. And we work, great together. Us as the middleman of the waste collection system, both in the public and private sector, we have a very, very good relationship. So all that goes pretty well. I've lobbied for other industries, the petroleum industry, chemical industry, et cetera. But this industry is the most bipartisan industry I've ever been with. We can get into any office, left or right or center, and everybody cares about recycling, everybody cares about waste. So that's been a blessing with this current job. But that's not really the problem. The problem is the two ends of our industry, the end that feeds us materials, and then the end that we send materials out of. And that's where we need actual government intervention and government action. I talked a little bit about how the brands could be more effective. And talking about recycling, could make their products more able to be recycled, could find markets ahead of time. And I know a lot of states are working, as is Colorado. I think Colorado passed an EPR bill, if I'm not mistaken. We're working on things like that, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And even from the consumer side on that, part that's feeding our industry, relative to contamination in the recycling stream. This causes a lot of problems for us. Give you one example, don't put your recyclables in a plastic bag. Plastic bags are the nightmare of our industry. Don't throw your plastic bags from the grocery store into the recycling stream. Those literally gum up our equipment. So making sure that what you're supposed to recycle at your local community and what goes in that stream. We would rather not have it than to have it wrong. You're not doing any service to the recycling world by just, we call it wish cycling. Like, if you don't know, put it in the garbage, don't put it in the recycling stream. It causes a great deal of problems. On the other end, like I said, we don't have the markets to increase the volume of things getting recycled. It's not just a matter of throwing more into the recycling bin and magically things are going to get recycled. Where we need government intervention is to increase the markets for recycled materials. And one way to do that is to pass legislation that would require more recycled content in raw products. And you can't really blame some of the manufacturers. If they're making more money off selling raw plastic than they are selling recycled plastic, it's a no-brainer. You're not gonna, no business is gonna fall into that level of goodness, when they could be making a lot more the other way. So we need government intervention for recycled content. We also need things like tax incentives and things like that to improve infrastructure for recycling. But what we really need, that's more of related to us as our industry. But what we really need help with is on both ends, because we are the guys that get left holding the bag. So as the representative knows, because I'm sure she hears a lot of this quite often. So
appreciate that, Darryl. And one of the things that I've been investing in the environmental compliant or sustainability industry for more than a decade now, and it's done pretty well for me. One of the things I have to do is I have to really go out and do a lot of research around innovative technologies and capabilities that are out there, such as mycelium, right? In different ways. Basically, mushrooms are being engineered now to consume waste and be able to be reused as product substitutes for cardboard, plastic, and so forth. In regards to that, and this question is across everybody, but I'll start with Sarah. In regards to gamification, right? How are companies incentivizing people within their organizations to look outside their paradigms to find more innovative approaches to materiality, to where it's reusable and becoming more circular?
Sure. I think a lot of it really starts with materials research, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think gamification is good for a lot of sustainability initiatives. I don't know that it works very well for innovation, because I do think it takes a lot of real expertise to think outside the box and understand what other materials are available. We're working with cement companies, for example, to figure out how do you make that operation recyclable, or I should say more sustainable. When you think about cement, sustainability is not the first thing that comes to mind. And so changing that entire industry takes a lot of research. which IBM is very good at. We have a whole bunch of people who have won Nobel Prizes, and we have a lot of patents. And it takes a lot of research and expertise to actually come up with what are alternatives, which is a real thing that we should be incentivizing across the board. I think in terms of gamification, we've seen that become very effective in terms of changing behaviors within corporations. We worked with EY, for example, one of the big four, in helping them reduce their emissions, which mostly come from business travel. Obviously, COVID helped with reducing business travel, but even as COVID has been lifting, we worked with them to give them a tool to educate their employees on how much of a carbon footprint they're leaving with their travel. And then we gamified the entire process where they earn points by reducing their footprint, by taking the train, for example, instead of an airplane, by walking instead of taking a cab ride somewhere. And this has been very effective in terms of reducing their carbon footprint. And we see that this is a changing behavior, in my view, is the place where gamification becomes really effective in change management and changing how employees think, as well as how communities think.
And thank you for that answer. And this is also a follow-on question, not only for you, for everybody else on this panel, but just one thing to talk about the employees and getting them incentivized to change. How are we doing that with the boardroom? How are we doing that with the C-suite in regards to incentives, bonuses, and compensation around that? You know, and it's our stakeholders, not just shareholders, the stakeholders part of that.
Yeah, I think the market will force them to, because the capital markets are already beginning to recognize the role that climate risks poses to each of their businesses. Right now, the biggest industries facing that climate risk are the insurance firms, because the number of climate disasters are growing and the number of mega claims are growing, right? And we just saw just this summer, we've had 6 1 in 1,000-year flooding disasters. 1 in 1,000. The metric used to be 1 in 100, and now you've gone tenfold to 1 in 1,000, occurring almost, every other year. So that's changing how insurance companies are going to measure risk and how it impacts their business. So the point here is every industry now is going to be impacted due to climate risk, and they need to assess the impact on the bottom line. So if you look at it, it's both a top line and a bottom line mandate. On the top line, they have to think about how the market and their customers are perceiving their company and their products and services. The bottom line, they have to look at the risk as well as the efficiencies that are going to be driven by adopting more ESG friendly practices. I'll quickly also touch upon the employee engagement point, which was also brought up on the chat, which I think is very key. Because, and again, we're consultants at Avasant, right? So we like to always reframe the problem or the question. So the question is not how will you make your employees, take up more ESG initiatives. The question is really, how are you going to ensure your future employees are going to stick with your company, or how you're going to hire the workforce of tomorrow, because that workforce needs are changing and they're becoming more purpose-driven. So if you want to hire and keep the best employees, you want your organization to be more purpose-driven. And one of the key ways of doing that is to show your environmental stewardship. So ESG becomes one way to bring in and keep and retain employees and motivate them. And gamification is really becoming big in terms of employee engagement, and not just that, improving their productivity. There's companies like Vspire that really provide that sort of gamification platform where you can track your daily, weekly, monthly goals. And there's a leaderboard that you can see how you're doing compared to your other colleagues. And also it shows them what's the total impact on your organization. Because sometimes in a large organization, you may think a single individual's contributions don't matter. But here, you're able to visualize how your efforts will impact the company's overall goals. So all of these, I think, important ways and innovative ways to get to that target goal, whatever, and each company has to set its own target goals, but how do you get there?
Thank you. All right, so as a follow-on, then I'm trying to keep aware of the clock. We're about 14 minutes out from the end of this.
So Randy, there's a lot of questions coming in from the audience. I think one question in particular, I think can tie to the discussion that's happening right now is,
Sure.
what does success look like in all aspects of ESG if all companies embrace and does that? Companies embrace, what does that really mean? So that's interesting because I think the conversation is shifting that way. So who wants to take that on?
That's a great question. I think one of the things in order to be able to do that is you need to have that data, both internally as well as external availability of true data, right? One of the big challenges I found back when I was doing this national pilot was we had multiple data sources, both internal as well as external, we had to go seek in order to bring a more holistic view. So in regards to that, I would like to add that source in there as well. How, Sarah, from a private industry perspective, a lot of companies have a gold mine of data within their own organization that they often don't take advantage of, but being able to take advantage of that as well as external data, are you seeing that as a challenge?
Absolutely. I think data is the great enabler for sustainability. If you followed the COP26 conference last year, a lot of the leaders were saying, we know what the problem is. We know that we need to have some action to get there, but we struggle with where do we start? How do we measure impact, etc. And really data is the way to start, figuring out where the problem is and then where to make the greatest impact. We have an IBV research study that showed that companies that combine both digital transformation and sustainability really outperform their peers in all sorts of ways, in revenue, in profitability, in impact, and they're even more resilient. So throughout the pandemic, for example, they continue to outperform their peers. And so digital transformation is the way to get companies going and to get organizations in general, not just private companies, with a base standard of truth in terms of what are you trying to impact. Obviously, if we were all successful, we would meet all the 17 UN SDG goals by 2035. Figuring out what does that mean for your own company or your own organization is the way to get us there, right? We have many offerings that we have, including an ESG data fabric. So combining many data sources from all sorts of places, both internal and external, and giving live connections to those data sources, and then being able to report back what is your baseline, where are you starting from, and then what is the impact of each of the initiatives that you have across your organization on what you're trying to achieve. And so that's part of the kind of the basics of putting an ESG program together in order to understand your impact, understand where you're starting, and figure out how to move forward.
Thank you. In regards to that, also, Daryl, from an industry perspective, what is the waste and recycling industry doing in regards to their data, as well as the data they're bringing in from these local municipalities, landfills, and so forth?
Yeah, let me touch on data in a second, but I wanted to make one comment about something I've seen. I've been since 1986 working, and I've always worked in environment and safety, mostly in corporations until I got to DC, where I'm representing corporations. And I can tell you for a fact that things have gotten a lot better in that regard. Safety and environment used to be these little side programs that the CEO might not even know he had. He might not even know he had an environmental person on his staff. Today, you can't get through a board meeting without talking about these things. So I just want to bring a little optimism into the discussion and tell you from my 30 some years experience, it's mind blowing how much environment and safety has infiltrated into the discussion. And into the people's accountability, not the supervisor, manager, director, vice president, president, boardroom level. It's astonishing. So relative to data, we know what you throw away. We have data, call on us to call on us to help out. We can also go into facilities, as waste companies and help, maybe you haven't thought about, certain ways of dealing with your waste that could be better. So call upon, the waste industry to help out in that regard. That's one way we can certainly be helpful. And quite often we do these surveys of what's being thrown away. I will tell you, there's a lot of food being thrown away in Western society, and that's something we should get our hands around. It's ridiculous. So.
Thank you, Darren. And you bring up a very good point that I'm going to now go to Representative Froelich and ask her is, incentives around the tax credits to reduction of potential business or local taxes available for those organizations which are reducing both waste streams as well as enhancing overall societal and governance aspects of ESG.
Well, I think the key part is that goal setting. So before we ask industry to participate in X, Y, and Z, we have to both set the goal and connect it to what it's supposed to affect. So if your goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, how are you going to measure that? And then why are you even doing it? So you have to connect the science to the goal. And then absolutely, I mean, the feeling among the environmentalists, environmental movement is, a priority is to electrify as much as possible. So, or to move off of fossil fuels in general, but really electrification is the rallying cry. And of course, then the electricity has to be generated from renewables. Otherwise, it's not really beneficial. So absolutely, incentives are going to play a huge part. And then there's this delicate balance between, does the government tell you have to electrify your fleet by X date? Or does it simply say, here are grants for EV charging stations that you can access, and let the market take the place, or take it, do its thing, and what's the interplay between that? And of course, there's federal action, and then there's state and local action. So all of it is kind of, it becomes chicken and egg in terms of just coming to the table and deciding that these things are real. I mean, we have folks that don't believe that climate change is real in elected office. So we got our work cut out for us. But I think the other aspect of corporate action is also in that goal setting, and then a huge consumer demand for both not only goods and services that Sarah mentioned, but also a huge demand for ethical investing, for sustainable investing, and that's going to drive markets, and then hopefully create already existing incentives for corporations that don't have to come from government grants.
And what I'm hearing from everybody here is that there's no one solution, no one size fits all, but it's going to take a cross collaboration and partnership across industry as well as government entities, and across industries that normally don't operate with each other, to see if they're complements to each other. And Darryl, from that perspective, do you see organizations starting to collaborate outside their normal paradigm of operation?
Yeah, absolutely. In Washington, D.C., we do what we call forming coalitions. So like, I'll give just a random example. We heard the other day that there is a tire shortage, and some of our waste companies are having trouble obtaining tires. So we immediately reached out to the Tire Manufacturing Association. Is there anything we can do together? Can we go to Capitol Hill together? Can we write letters together? Can we, do any sort of research together to try to deal with that issue? But I have seen, so coalitions have been, forming in DC for forever, but I've seen over the past few years a lot more coalitions being formed and a lot more of the supply chain being involved relative to waste and recycling. It used to be, just a little bit of the supply chain. Now we're going all the way down to the mining industry and all the way out to, final, people that are using the product in using the recycled goods. So, and trying to find a market for those. So, and there are several, there's a US Plastics Pact, there's a US, there's a new compost coalition. There's all these coalitions forming. They're involving all sorts of industries along the supply chain, and sometimes it's a little uncomfortable to be in the same room together. When you're sitting there saying you guys might kind of greenwashing some of this, and I'll give you kind of a random example again on that is the disposable coffee capsules that go into coffee machines. There's been some issues around that. The formulation has been changed so that by definition it's recyclable, but we as the waste industry literally do not know one place that is actually recycling those disposable cups. So that's kind of, a point of conflict when you start talking to manufacturers, but I can, so we're not, we haven't solved the plastics problems and, everything yet, but I can tell you the conversations are increasing exponentially here in Washington between all of these stakeholders, and this is kind of where things start. It's kind of where, things get into, well, they start in the media and with, societal outrage and things like that. But then the associations, trying to be forward looking, start forming these coalitions. And it's, what I see is it's a sign of good things to come. People are really trying to get in the same room together. So.
Thanks for the answer. And I know we got a couple minutes left, so we're going to basically just one of the questions, and I had this to the group as well, but I believe Anupam, you could also probably talk to this best, is basically the ESG or the underlying elements of ESG becoming the next big driver for sustainable economic growth and innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. And like any initiative or movement, one has to look at ways to bring it from the fringes to the mainstream, right? Companies like Patagonia have been around for years and years, and they've done very well because they've taken the circular economy concept to the next level, right? Where 0% of their products and supplies end up in landfill, and they don't use any virgin materials at all. Now, not every company can obviously get there, right? And not every company can afford to have zero landfill if you're, for example, in the oil and gas industry, right? How do you even get there? But if you reframe that question and the problem is, okay, if I'm an ONG company, I'm not really an ONG company, I'm an energy company. And how can I find alternative sources of fuel, clean sources of fuel? That's one way. Secondly, how can I offset my carbon footprint, right? And try and achieve those goals. So companies have to start thinking about their whole business model in terms of how it not only is impacting the planet, but how their future survival and growth and competitiveness is going to be reliant on ESG and how they can become more in line with that triple bottom line principles. So once they get that, I feel this is going to have its own life, and we're going to see this become mainstream.
So I'm sorry to interject, but we literally have 45 seconds to go. So I just want to thank all our panelists.
Absolutely.
Daryl Smith, President and CEO of National Waste and Recycling Association, Representative Meg Follick, State Representative, Colorado District 3, Sarah Toke, COO, Global Sustainability Practice, IBM, and of course, Anupam Goel, Managing Partner and Global Head of Sales and Strategic Partnership. And Randy Spires, our amazing moderator for today, distinguished Avasant Fellow and an expert in circular economy and ESG. And a big shout out to IBM, our sponsor. Thank you all so much. I think we could continue talking for another few hours. There's so much to discuss, but we promise you that we will have part 2 of this discussion very soon. Thank you all participants for being here today. And
Thank you,
will
and I appreciate
share
everybody's time.
it. The
Thank you,
recording
everyone.
will be
Bye.
shared with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.